Imagine a courtroom so tense that even the most seasoned legal professionals can't predict the outcome. In a dramatic turn of events, Judge Amy Berman Jackson orders former Attorney General Pam Bondi into custody for contempt, only to completely reverse her decision moments later. What followed was a high-stakes battle that exposed shocking misconduct by the prosecution and led to an unprecedented legal showdown. But before we dive into this story, I want to hear from you. Comment down below. Where in the world are you watching from? Let's light up this comment section. And hey, if you love stories with high drama, power shifts, and the kind of moments that leave people speechless, you're in the right place. Tap that subscribe button right now. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when we drop the next chapter in these powerful, untold stories. In this video, we dive into a courtroom drama that turned the legal system upside down, highlighting a shocking turn of events where Bondi's persistence and discovery of hidden evidence caused a powerful federal judge to reconsider her ruling, leading to the dismissal of charges, a misconduct investigation, and a dramatic demonstration of how truth and justice can prevail even in the most tense circumstances. The courtroom was eerily quiet, every eye fixed on the bench as the gavel of Judge Amy Berman Jackson slammed down with a force that echoed throughout the room. The sound was sharp and commanding, reverberating through the wood-paneled walls like the crack of a whip. Even the veteran court reporters flinched at the unexpected force, sensing the gravity of the moment. "Mrs. Bondi, you are in contempt of court," Judge Jackson declared, her voice ringing out with the kind of authority that only comes with decades of experience. There was no hesitation in her words, no room for negotiation. It was as if the entire room held its breath, waiting for the next move. "I am ordering the U.S. Marshals to take you into custody immediately." In that split second, the atmosphere shifted. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, as all eyes turned toward Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General of Florida, who stood calm and composed at the defense table. Her platinum blonde hair framed her face, and despite the weight of the judge's words, she gave no outward sign of fear or panic. Instead, she stood tall, her posture unshaken, as though she had expected this very moment to come, but she was not about to go quietly. As two U.S. Marshals began to approach, stepping forward with a slow, deliberate pace, Bondi raised her hand just slightly, a subtle gesture, but one that caught the attention of everyone in the room. There was a brief moment of hesitation from the Marshals as they looked to Judge Jackson, unsure how to proceed with this unexpected development. With a calm and unwavering voice, Bondi addressed the judge. "Your Honor," she began, "before you make a decision you'll regret, I believe you should review these documents." Her words cut through the tension in the room, suggesting that there was something more at play than anyone had anticipated. Without waiting for further instruction, Bondi's assistant hurriedly brought forward a sealed folder, placing it onto the judge's bench with a quiet but unmistakable urgency. The spectators, once restless and uncertain, fell into a deep silence as they watched the dramatic shift unfold. What happened next would change the course of the hearing, and perhaps the very nature of the case itself. Judge Jackson, known for her no-nonsense approach and her tough rulings on political figures, fixed Bondi with a sharp gaze. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she studied the woman standing before her. There was an undeniable tension between them, built up from the ongoing trial, but what no one could predict was what would happen in the next few minutes. Reluctantly, with a furrowed brow, Judge Jackson reached for the folder Bondi had presented. In those next few minutes, as the judge reviewed the documents, the balance of power in the courtroom began to shift. No one, not even the most seasoned legal observers, could have anticipated how quickly this moment would turn the case on its head. What Pam Bondi had uncovered in those pages would send shockwaves throughout the entire judicial system and lead to one of the most unexpected reversals in a courtroom many had ever seen. Judge Amy Berman Jackson had earned a reputation as one of the most unyielding and authoritative figures in the legal world. Appointed to the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia during the Obama administration, she had presided over numerous high-profile political cases, each more contentious than the last. At 69 years old, Judge Jackson had become known not just for her legal prowess, but for her stern demeanor. She did not tolerate disruption in her courtroom, and many of her rulings, especially in politically sensitive cases, were met with both admiration and criticism. Some legal analysts described her as meticulous, a judge who adhered strictly to the letter of the law, leaving no room for interpretation or emotional considerations. She was often seen as a no-nonsense figure who believed that every case, no matter how politically charged, should be judged with impartiality and precision. On the other hand, her critics viewed her as someone driven by a hidden agenda, someone willing to use the power of her court to impose her will, sometimes harshly. Despite these divided opinions, one thing was certain. Judge Jackson was not someone who would back down easily. Her reputation for tough rulings and strict courtroom control was well known, and those who found themselves in her courtroom knew they would need to be prepared for an intense battle. But no one could have predicted that today would be any different. Today's hearing, like many before it, had already begun under a cloud of tension. The case at hand involved allegations of prosecutorial misconduct, a serious accusation that had rocked the political world. Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General of Florida, was representing a defendant who claimed that key evidence had been deliberately withheld by the Department of Justice. The prosecution, led by James Harrington, had strongly denied these allegations. Bondi, however, wasn't willing to let the matter drop. She was a seasoned attorney, known for her sharp legal mind and her fierce defense of her clients. Bondi's experience in the courtroom was extensive. As Florida's first female attorney general, she had faced some of the state's most pressing legal issues, from contentious healthcare legislation to complex drug trafficking cases. After her tenure in office, she had built a solid reputation as a formidable defense lawyer, particularly in cases involving government overreach. She had become known for her methodical approach and her ability to unearth the kind of evidence that could tilt the scales of justice in her favor. Bondi was not the kind of lawyer who was easily intimidated, and she certainly wasn't one to back down from a fight, especially when she believed that justice was at stake. In this particular case, the stakes were higher than ever. Bondi's client, a former government official, had been charged with obstruction of justice, but there were serious questions about whether the evidence against him had been mishandled or intentionally withheld. Bondi had uncovered a trail of documentation suggesting that key exculpatory evidence had never been presented to the defense. Bondi had raised these concerns during the hearing, and despite repeated warnings from Judge Jackson, she continued to challenge the integrity of the prosecution's evidence handling. The judge, known for her firm stance on maintaining order and decorum in her courtroom, had already warned Bondi twice about the tone of her accusations. "Ms. Bondi, these are serious allegations you're making against the prosecution," Judge Jackson had told her, her voice sharp with irritation. "Unless you have concrete evidence to support these claims, I will not allow you to continue with this line of argument." But Bondi, undeterred, had pressed on, insisting that the prosecution had deliberately withheld critical evidence. This was the moment where the tension in the room reached its boiling point. Judge Jackson, who had been poised and controlled throughout the proceedings, was clearly frustrated by what she saw as an unfounded attack on the integrity of the prosecution. She had drawn a hard line. Unless Bondi could present irrefutable evidence, she would not tolerate any further insinuations. But Bondi remained calm and unshaken, confident that she had the evidence to back up her claims. "Your Honor," Bondi had said, her voice firm, "we have reason to believe that exculpatory evidence was deliberately withheld from discovery. If the court would allow me to present our findings." She was making a direct challenge, refusing to let the matter go without a fight. Judge Jackson had cut her off. "You've made these allegations repeatedly, Miss Bondi," the judge had said, her patience visibly thinning. "Yet you've provided nothing substantial to support them. This courtroom is not a venue for political theater or unfounded accusations against the Department of Justice." But Bondi, ever the skilled advocate, refused to be silenced. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she had replied, her voice unwavering, "this isn't political theater. This is about justice and due process for my client." The words hung in the air, sparking a moment of heated silence. Bondi's insistence on exposing the truth had now led to a pivotal crossroads. Judge Jackson, known for her strict adherence to protocol, now had a decision to make. Would she allow this line of questioning to continue, or would she impose the consequences of contempt for defying her authority? The tension in the room was palpable, but it was this moment, Bondi's bold challenge, that would push the situation to a breaking point. It was this moment that would set the stage for the dramatic courtroom clash that would follow, a confrontation that would reshape the entire course of the trial. The courtroom, already on edge from the heated exchange, now simmered with anticipation as the conflict between Judge Jackson and Pam Bondi reached its breaking point. The atmosphere had been electric from the moment the trial had begun, but now the tension was palpable, hanging in the air like a storm ready to break. The gallery was packed. Legal observers, journalists, and members of the public had all gathered, sensing that something significant was unfolding. They had no idea just how dramatic this hearing was about to become. Everyone was aware that this case carried political weight, but they had underestimated how much the stakes would rise. For months, this case had been brewing in the background, a high-profile political investigation riddled with allegations of prosecutorial misconduct. Bondi's client, a former government official, had been accused of obstruction of justice, but he and his defense team believed that key pieces of evidence that could exonerate him, had been deliberately kept from the defense. Bondi, with her years of experience in both state and federal courts, knew how to challenge the system when it failed to deliver justice. Judge Jackson, known for her tough rulings in politically sensitive cases, had already warned Bondi twice about the nature of her accusations. She had made it clear that if Bondi couldn't back up her claims with evidence, she would not hesitate to shut her down. But Bondi was undeterred. With the pressure mounting, she pressed forward, arguing that the prosecution had acted in bad faith by withholding exculpatory evidence. Ms. Bondi, these are serious accusations you're making against the prosecution, Judge Jackson had said earlier, her tone growing more impatient. Unless you have concrete evidence to support these claims, I will not allow you to continue with this line of argument. Judge Jackson's patience was wearing thin, but Bondi, a lawyer who had spent years battling in the courtroom, remained steadfast. Your Honor, Bondi replied coolly, her voice steady, we have reason to believe that exculpatory evidence was deliberately withheld from discovery. If the court would allow me to present our findings, I believe it would be in the interest of justice. At this point, the tension in the room had reached a boiling point. The spectators, sensing a significant turning point, leaned in, waiting to see how Judge Jackson would respond. The courtroom was so silent that the soft shuffle of papers on the prosecution's desk seemed amplified. There was no question that the situation was reaching a dramatic crescendo. Judge Jackson's response was sharp, cutting through the stillness of the room. You've made these allegations repeatedly, Miss Bondi, she snapped. Yet, you've provided nothing substantial to support them. This courtroom is not a venue for political theater or unfounded accusations against the Department of Justice. Bondi, however, wasn't backing down. With all due respect, Your Honor, she said firmly, her voice never faltering, this isn't political theater. This is about justice and due process for my client. Her words hung in the air, laden with the weight of the moment. She had made a direct challenge, and in doing so she had placed herself squarely at odds with the judge's authority. Judge Jackson's patience had clearly reached its limit. The courtroom was now filled with a palpable sense of tension, as if everyone knew something was about to give. Miss Bondi, I've heard enough, Judge Jackson had warned, her voice steely and resolute. Your comments are bordering on contempt. Bondi, refusing to relent, had delivered one final retort. Your Honor, if seeking the truth is contempt, then perhaps the standard for contempt needs examination. The words were bold, defiant, and packed with unspoken implications. The response was met with a sharp intake of breath from the spectators. They had never seen Bondi this direct, this confrontational. Her challenge was not just aimed at the judge, but at the entire system, suggesting that the pursuit of justice itself had been misjudged. And in that moment, everything in the courtroom shifted. Bondi's words had clearly struck a nerve with Judge Jackson. The room, once silent, was now alive with gasps and murmurs. For a brief moment there was an awkward stillness, as if the entire courtroom had collectively realized they had just witnessed a pivotal moment in the trial. Bondi had taken the risk of challenging the judge's authority head-on, and Judge Jackson, not one to be easily intimidated, was forced to react. It was this final, daring remark: "If seeking the truth is contempt, then perhaps the standard for contempt needs examination," that pushed Judge Jackson over the edge, causing her to make an immediate and forceful decision. Without further hesitation, Judge Jackson ordered Bondi into contempt of court, a ruling that shocked the room. The U.S. Marshals were summoned to take Bondi into custody on the spot. But as the Marshals began to approach Bondi, she wasn't finished. She had one final card to play. With the courtroom holding its breath, Bondi, standing tall and composed, requested the judge's consideration of the evidence she had just uncovered. She insisted that the documents in her possession would change everything. The stakes could not have been higher. If Judge Jackson allowed these documents to be introduced, it could result in a major shift, not just in this case, but in the entire trial. If Bondi was bluffing, it could ruin her career, but if Judge Jackson ignored the evidence, it could mean a miscarriage of justice. The decision that followed would send shockwaves through the legal world. As the tension in the courtroom reached its peak, Judge Jackson's gaze remained fixed on Pam Bondi, who stood unwavering in the face of the contempt ruling. The entire courtroom seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the next move in this high-stakes legal drama. The two U.S. Marshals, who had earlier moved toward Bondi with the intention of taking her into custody, now stood uncertainly in place, looking to the judge for further instructions. The stakes were too high, the potential for chaos too great for anyone to act without Judge Jackson's explicit command. But Bondi was far from rattled. She stood poised, even in the face of immediate detention, and made one last attempt to change the trajectory of the hearing. With calm deliberation, she had requested that Judge Jackson review the evidence she had just presented, the documents that had been placed on the judge's bench. Bondi's challenge was clear. Before she was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, Judge Jackson needed to consider the potential weight of the documents that could reveal serious misconduct on the part of the prosecution. The spectators, who had been murmuring in surprise and disbelief, fell silent once again. No one could have predicted the direction this trial had taken, and now the courtroom was on the edge of its seat, waiting to see if Bondi's gamble would pay off. Judge Jackson, though initially unmoved by Bondi's arguments, hesitated. She was a judge known for her strict, no-nonsense approach, and she rarely tolerated defiance in her courtroom. But now, with Bondi's calm yet resolute stance and the mounting pressure of the situation, Judge Jackson found herself at a crossroads. Her reputation for fairness and impartiality was on the line. Ignoring the new evidence could lead to an unjust outcome, but admitting to a mistake in her own ruling could raise questions about her ability to administer justice without bias. With visible reluctance, Judge Jackson reached for the folder that Bondi had presented. She opened it, her eyes scanning the first document with a look of careful scrutiny. Her face, which had previously been stern and unyielding, began to shift. The dismissive attitude that had marked her earlier responses to Bondi's claims began to dissipate as she studied the contents of the folder in front of her. The change in her expression did not go unnoticed by the people in the room. The atmosphere shifted again, this time with a sense of cautious curiosity. As the minutes ticked by, Judge Jackson's attention was entirely consumed by the documents in front of her. The once tense silence in the courtroom was now replaced by an almost tangible sense of anticipation, as the spectators realized that the course of the trial was in the process of being altered. Legal experts in the audience exchanged nervous glances, their eyes glued to the judge, waiting for her next move. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Judge Jackson looked up from the documents and spoke, her voice considerably quieter and more measured than it had been moments earlier. "Where did you obtain these documents?" she asked Bondi, her tone now more curious than accusatory. The shift was subtle but unmistakable, The judge was no longer acting with the same authority and certainty that had previously characterized her interactions with Bondi. Bondi, however, remained composed. "They were provided to us by a whistleblower within the Department of Justice last night, Your Honor," she replied. "As you can see from the authentication markers and electronic timestamps, they are unaltered internal communications." The room held its breath again, and the prosecution's side looked visibly shaken. James Harrington, the lead prosecutor, had been sitting tensely through the exchange, and now he rose quickly from his seat, interrupting the proceedings. "Your Honor, we have no knowledge of these alleged documents," he said, his voice betraying his growing unease. "The prosecution demands an opportunity to review whatever Miss Bondi is presenting before the court proceeds." Judge Jackson, however, remained firm. She held up her hand to silence him. "You'll have your chance, Mr. Harrington," she said sharply. "For now, I'm reviewing these materials myself." Bondi's team stood still, watching intently as the judge continued to read through the documents. The prosecutors on the opposite side of the room had begun to whisper among themselves, clearly nervous about the unexpected turn of events. Bondi's client, the former government official charged with obstruction of justice, sat in his seat, his face a picture of anxiety, but there was also a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Could this be the break they had been waiting for? Minutes ticked by in what seemed like slow motion, and Judge Jackson continued to study the evidence presented before her. Finally, she addressed the court reporter, speaking in a voice that carried the weight of the moment. "Let the record show that I am reviewing documents presented by defense counsel that appear to be internal Department of Justice emails and memoranda related to evidence in this case." At this, Harrington rose to his feet once more, his voice tinged with frustration and concern. "Your Honor, without knowing the source of these alleged documents, the prosecution objects to their consideration. They may be fabricated or obtained illegally." Judge Jackson, now fully engaged in the review of the documents, responded quickly, her patience beginning to wear thin. "Mr. Harrington," she said, her tone sharper than before, "these documents bear official DOJ watermarks and appear to be from the department's secure internal communication system. Are you suggesting that Ms. Bondi or her team fabricated Department of Justice watermarked documents?" Harrington hesitated, visibly flustered by the judge's questioning. "No, Your Honor, but—" Judge Jackson cut him off with a firm motion. "Then please be seated while I continue my review." The room fell silent again. As she turned to the next set of documents, Judge Jackson's expression grew more serious. Her brow furrowed as she read, her notes becoming more frequent, her eyes scanning the pages with growing concern. The evidence in front of her was beginning to tell a story she hadn't anticipated, one of misconduct, deceit, and potential corruption within the prosecution's team. After several more tense minutes, Judge Jackson looked up again, this time directing her attention to the lead prosecutor. "Mr. Harrington," she said, her voice now laced with a mix of disbelief and authority, "these emails appear to show members of your prosecution team discussing the deliberate withholding of certain witness statements from discovery. Can you explain this?" Harrington's face drained of color. His eyes darted nervously as he tried to regain his composure. "Your Honor, without seeing the specific emails, I cannot comment on their content or context," he stammered. Judge Jackson wasn't finished. She read aloud from one of the emails. "Hammond's testimony contradicts our timeline. If we include it in discovery, the defense will use it to undermine our entire case. Recommend we classify it as non-relevant to discovery requirements." The silence that followed was deafening. Bondi's side exchanged knowing glances, while the prosecution sat in stunned silence. Bondi's strategy had paid off, and now the full scale of the injustice was starting to come into view. The courtroom grew even more tense as Judge Jackson continued to review the documents presented by Pam Bondi. The prosecution's objections grew more desperate, but Judge Jackson remained focused. Her expression shifted from skepticism to concern as she read through the emails, which appeared to show members of the prosecution team discussing the deliberate withholding of exculpatory evidence. "Mr. Harrington," Judge Jackson said, her voice sharp, "these emails suggest a strategy to hide key witness statements from discovery. Can you explain this?" Harrington hesitated, clearly rattled. "Your Honor, Without knowing the specific emails, I cannot comment, he stammered. Judge Jackson responded coldly, reading from the documents aloud. Hammond's testimony contradicts our timeline. If we include it in discovery, the defense will use it to undermine our entire case. The room was stunned. Bondi had successfully exposed a clear attempt to manipulate the case in favor of the prosecution, and the judge wasn't backing down. Mr. Harrington, are you suggesting these documents are fabricated? She pressed. His defense faltered, leaving the courtroom in an almost suffocating silence as the weight of the misconduct became undeniable. Judge Jackson, having reviewed the evidence, was now forced to confront the severity of the situation. The documents Bondi had presented revealed deliberate misconduct by the prosecution, and the room could feel the shift in power. With a measured tone, Judge Jackson ordered the U.S. Marshals to stand down, rescinding the contempt order against Bondi. The courtroom erupted into murmurs as the judge's next words came down like a hammer. All charges against the defendant are dismissed with prejudice, she declared. The defendant, exonerated at last, visibly exhaled, while Bondi stood firm, maintaining her professional composure despite the massive legal victory. But Judge Jackson wasn't finished. I am referring this matter for a full investigation into prosecutorial misconduct, she announced, sending shockwaves through the room. She also ordered a review of past cases handled by the same prosecution team, ensuring the misconduct wasn't an isolated incident. The weight of the decision wasn't lost on anyone. In a final act of accountability, Judge Jackson self-reported to the Judicial Conduct Committee for her initial misjudgment in issuing the contempt order. The courtroom stood in silence as the case concluded, highlighting how justice had, in the end, corrected itself. And there you have it, a dramatic courtroom showdown that not only reversed a contempt ruling, but also uncovered serious prosecutorial misconduct. Pam Bondi's persistence, combined with Judge Amy Berman Jackson's willingness to reconsider her decision, ensured that justice prevailed, even when the odds were stacked against it. This case serves as a powerful reminder that the legal system, while imperfect, can correct itself when truth and integrity are upheld. Bondi's courageous defense and Judge Jackson's commitment to fairness show us that justice, no matter how delayed or hard-fought, can still be achieved. Thank you for watching this incredible story of courtroom drama. If you found this story as captivating as we did, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more legal battles and courtroom showdowns. What would you have done in Pam Bondi's shoes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next video.